Karandeep. What are you going to teach us today?
So today I'm going to be talking about how to prepare for your external audits and inspections. Now, I know the philosophy is that you should always be prepared for an audit, but there's no harm in just doing a little bit of preparation and making sure your day goes well. But yes, it is a philosophy that I stand by. There's also the concept of unannounced inspections or unannounced audits. So yes, you should always be ready for an audit. But if you're in a position where it's something that's scheduled, it's always best practice, regardless of how well you think that you're doing, that you do some form of preparation, because without that certification, you cannot pass regulatory, and if you do not have regulatory, you cannot legally sell. So it's definitely something that you should invest in. Now, initially, I was going to leave this as a bit of a open. Sure. Is that someone talking? Oh,
Um,
okay. Sure. So initially, I was going to leave this as a bit of an open talk, but I think it's beneficial to have some slides. But the way I'm going to structure this today is, if anyone wants to interrupt me in between or throw a question, feel free to do so. I'm happy to keep this as an open talk. So I'm just going to get my slides ready. If you just give me a second. Please share. Perfect. Is that visible and legible for everybody?
Absolutely, yes. Thank you.
Excellent. So the topic of the talk today, of course, is how to prepare for your external audits and inspections, and what are the common issues and how to avoid them. So the summary of what I'm going to be talking about today, of course, is what are the things that you can start doing straight away to start preparing for your internal audits and or inspections. Now, what's the difference between an audit and inspection? And this is something that we can talk about with the differences of the EU and the US. In the EU and even the UK, for the matter, we have authorised and notified bodies. These are bodies appointed by the union to come in and conduct audits for you. Whereas when you have something like the US FDA, it's the FDA themselves coming to do, and they don't do audits on you. Instead, what they do is inspections, but the principles between them are more or less exactly the same. So the process of which you have to prepare for an audit or an inspection is more or less the same. Right, so disclaimer, this is a very important one. So again, external audits are critical for regulatory compliance, but like I said, you should always be prepared for an audit at any given time. Anyone is familiar with the EU as well, and a lot of companies, especially if there's any startups listening here today, once you achieve your CE mark or even your UKCA mark, if you go and read the regulations, it specifically states there that at least once every 5 years, they will come down and conduct what's known on you as a unannounced audit. Now, I've been on the other end of it. I'm pretty sure there's people on this call that maybe been at the other end of it. It's where the auditors knock on your door one day, completely unannounced, as per the name, and come and conduct an audit on you. So you should assume and be ready that an audit can happen at any given time, and always make sure that your quality management system, your regulatory, everything is up to date. And it's important to note that when you have these unannounced audits, let's just say all of your regulatory staff are off, you cannot use that as an excuse. And if you say, hey, the regulatory guys or the quality guys are here, I can't help you, you will immediately fail that audit. Hence the importance of teaching quality and regulatory throughout your whole organization, and make sure that there's just one person or one department, because if that person is not there that day when this unannounced audit happens, you can potentially fail the audit. So that's something that I put down as a disclaimer. So when it talks about the importance of culture as well, it's important, so if I go back to the previous slide, it's important to encourage employees to view audits as opportunities for growth rather than threats. You need to understand that when you're having your audits or inspections, they ain't necessarily turning up to look for faults. This ain't the police or anything like that. They're just there to make sure that you're compliant. If you're a medical device company, the last thing that you want is to go out and start causing harm, because you're contradicting yourself. The whole point of working in medtech itself is that you want to change lives, you want to help people live with certain diseases, injuries, etc. And the last thing you want is to be non-compliant, or maybe some of your processes have potential risks. So it's something that's very, very important, and something that you should very much be aware of. So another thing as well that you think of as well, stay up to date with the regulations. So of course you have the EU MDR, you have FDA CFR, but there's also various different white papers released. There's also guidance documents by the FDA. Within the EU, we have things like the MDCG, we have team notified body. It's important that you keep up to these with these things, because the regulations can be sometimes gray areas. It could just be a couple of lines. It may not necessarily be clear, but it's the standards and guidance documents that tell you what the sort of best practices effectively are. So make sure you do that. So the key takeaway, what I'm going to say here is, if you run an organization and you have some form of onboarding process, have a piece that's dedicated to quality and regulatory, have a piece that tells people what an audit is all about. And even just before the audit, go around your organization, regardless of the size, maybe conduct a meeting and let people know saying, hey, on this particular day, we're going to have an audit. You may be questioned. This is what you can do. And another thing that I've seen in many organizations, of course, is if somebody's questioned on an area or a space which is outside of their sort of regular day-to-day work, there's nothing wrong with you turning around and saying to the auditor, hey, that's outside of my scope of work. But if you want to know more about this, go and speak to so-and-so person. And it's important that people know how to answer that question. There's nothing wrong with saying, hey, that's out of my scope, but this is the person that you should speak to. So it's important that we drill that into the company culture. So it goes down here. It's all to do with preparation. Preparation is key. Number one, of course, is organize all of your documentation required for the audit. Now, this is a very, very interesting. When I walk into organizations, I say to them, hey, guys, how do you go about backing up your documentation? It's automatic in SharePoint, etc. It's automatic in G Drive. Okay, great. What if Microsoft shuts down tomorrow? It can happen. If anyone remembers, in August 2020, there was a point where Google Drive went down for a few hours. Imagine you was in the middle of an audit. You can't say to the auditor, hey, we can't access our files now for the next 4 hours. So one trick that I've always employed is before an audit happens, do a manual download of all your documents and records, maybe the night before. So at worst, you maybe lost 12 hours worth of records and they may not be fully up to date, but always manually do that. Anything can happen, and especially we live in the modern age, you could have a cybersecurity attack. Anything can happen that means that you can't necessarily access your files. So make sure you have all of your documentation required for the audit. Also, like I said, so it might be that you're relying on your quality and regulatory guide to lead the audit. What's there to say they don't turn up to work on Monday? Anything can happen. They might fall ill. They may get caught in traffic. You can't turn around and say to the auditor, hey, sorry, the guy's not here. So make sure that there's other people in the organization have access to the documentation, but not just that, know what specific documentation that they should be looking for and all the records. The next one, of course, is conducting an internal review to ensure your process is aligned with the regulations. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a full-blown internal audit, maybe just a light version of it, and make sure everything is up to date. Has there been changes in standards? Has there been new guidance documents put out there? Has there anything like that? And I think often the best way of doing this in a recorded manner is, of course, your management review meetings. Why not conduct a management review meeting maybe 1 or 2 weeks before your actual audit? Because you now have a recorded document, a recorded record of how the state of your quality management system is and any areas of concern. If you spot any areas of concern, you can open a corrective action. You can start doing things like that, because when you're sitting in an audit and there's an issue that might be identified, if you've already opened a corrective action on it, it shows that you've already identified the issue and are doing something about it. And that's showing something to the auditor rather than trying to hide that issue. So, there's nothing wrong with having corrective actions open. And I think with a lot of companies is they often get the CAPA process mixed up. They think the less CAPAs they have, the better off they are. Now, there may be a certain element of truth when it comes to corrective actions, but not preventive actions. Preventive action shows that you're being sort of proactive. You're trying to actually look to see where the issue actually is. Whereas a corrective action is you're fixing it after it's already happened. But again, the difference between a major and minor nonconformity and maybe a major nonconformity if you haven't addressed it, whereas, for example, if you're doing something about it, then generally that can fall to a minor nonconformity, or in some cases, it may not be a nonconformity also. By all means, if you spot any issues, just open any corrective actions, start putting some actions in place. And of course, do compliance checks as well, depending on what the audit is about. Is it an EU MDR audit? Is it an ISO 13485 audit? Is it an FDA audit, or is it rest of the world audit? And then, of course, the main thing about it is, of course, establishing a checklist for the key areas to be covered in the audit. What is the audit scope? It may not be that the audit's covering every area. It may just be one of your manufacturing sites. So if you're a company that has maybe 10 different manufacturing sites, and maybe this particular day is just going to be that particular manufacturing site. What are you doing in that manufacturing site? What is the scope of your certification? And just checklist basically for what the key areas are doing the audit, and also the key personnel. Now, my recommendation here is always have a delegate for every process you have in your company. And it's important that you write that in your procedures as well. So don't just say the quality manager will be doing X. My recommendation is the quality manager or a suitable delegate. What that means is that tasks can be delegated. So it might be the quality manager does everything, but let's just say they're not available, they're on vacation, or maybe they've gone to some training. Make sure that there's another person that they can delegate it to. And maybe a better word could be a suitably trained delegate. So it's not just somebody that maybe works in a different department and then you hand your quality management system to them. It's basically somebody who's been suitably trained to do that particular task. That's the most important piece here. Make sure that they're trained to do that. And the wording that's often used in the regulations and standards, of course, is competence. What is meant by competent? It doesn't necessarily mean that you hold a certificate. It just means that you're able to do the job. You can demonstrate that through training records, you can demonstrate that through certifications, etc. And these are all important things to consider. So those are my key takeaways here for a start, is the pre-preparation. Pre-preparation is key. You can do things like mock audits, etc. And one of my favorite techniques, if you're working in a particular sort of traditional brick and mortar business, which is majority of what medical devices are, why not have the quality management go around and speak to the people as if they were the auditor? Throw a few questions at them and see how they react. Now, if somebody can't answer the question, it's not necessarily their fault. They shouldn't be in trouble for it. Then you identify, okay, this person maybe needs a little bit more training, or maybe they don't understand certain things, because the language that an auditor speaks or an inspector speaks may be slightly different to the language of which you speak internally. It could be that they know the answer to the question, but maybe just don't understand the wording. So just go around and make sure people are trained and fully aware what's being on. And that's basically it. So having a scribe, so this one is not necessarily in preparation. So again, you should prepare a scribe. But what I mean here is this is really a really good tool of which I've always used in audit. So if I'm sitting on an audit, it's hard for me to sit down and make notes of what the auditor's asking or the inspector's asking for. But it's really good to just have someone in the room, almost like, if you go into a courtroom, there's always be someone sitting in the corner taking notes. Just have a scribe, a dedicated individual to document the whole process. At 9 o'clock, they asked for this document. Then they went to this environment, they did this, they did that, etc. And you can even put this in some of your public pages within your own internal company, so people can see what the audit process is in real time, and they can see what the auditor comments are. So for example, if they're saying that in a few minutes time, the auditor mentioned that we're going to be going to the production environment, then maybe somebody in production can see, so the auditor is going to be here in a few minutes, maybe we need to readjust some work, and maybe we can get some records ready, etc. So that's something that you need to do as well. And then, of course, these notes come in very useful for post-audit follow-up. So if anyone's ever been on an audit or inspection and there's non-conformities found, you're usually required to give some reasoning or write a report back to whoever the inspecting body is at the time to let them know what sort of evidence you're going to be providing or what corrective actions you're going to be putting in place effectively. So mock audits. Now, I think this is a really powerful tool. So again, they are internal audits. But what I'm talking about is a mock audit. Now, the difference here with the internal audit is you're just focusing on certain areas, etc. A mock audit is treat it as if it was the actual external audit. How would it happen? The auditor comes in at 9 o'clock when the inspector comes in at this time. You go in, you're asking random questions. And you need to remember this auditor or inspector does not know anything about your company, or maybe just knows the bare minimum. Treat it as if you don't know anything about the company and come up with questions. What typical questions are you going to be asking the different members of staff when you're going around? And just get people used to that audit language, for example, the certain words, etc. And then use this to basically identify any gaps. And then this is where you're going to start seeing which particular members of staff or which particular areas of the company basically need time to work. But it's also about building confidence with your team as well. So once they've got to this mock audit scenario and they've dealt with the pressure and they've dealt with the certain types of questions, when the real day actually comes, they know how to go about it. Whereas if you have somebody who's in the company, particularly, let's just say that somebody's just come fresh out of college or fresh out of school, and they've only been working in the company for a few weeks, and all of a sudden there's this external audit, they're probably not going to know what to do, and that's not their fault. Whereas if you train them beforehand saying, hey, look, this person may ask you these types of questions, and this is what you need to do, it gives them that level of confidence. So when they get up that day and they're in the company and they're being inspected or they're having questions thrown at them, at least then that person knows what to do. So again, key here is communication with auditors as well. Be very careful and listen to what the auditor says and give them the information of which they ask for. Don't start going off onto different topics and other things and start throwing them extra records and things. That's usually a recipe for disaster. So if they ask for a specific record, give them that record. Don't just start giving them other things and trying to impress them. Just give them what they've asked for. That's very important. And I'm not saying that you should hide anything, but avoid volunteering unnecessary extra information. If they say to me, hey, can you show me your risk management report? You can do that. But then don't start pulling out your post-market surveillance and various other different things, complaint logs, etc., unless they ask for that. But by all means, give them what they ask for. But don't just start throwing extra things out. So I've just seen a question.
Sounds like the same advice you give somebody on the stand.
Yeah, effectively, just answer the question. Yeah, again, it goes back to a courtroom. Your solicitor will say to you, look, just answer the question that you've been there and don't start saying extra things. But by all means, if you asked, then answer those questions. So that's very important.
One of the things that
be very clear and concise.
Nelly?
Sure, go ahead, Nelly.
One of the problems I have with new auditees is they think they know what the auditor is going to ask and that they can answer the question before it's even asked. And it's like that. And it's like I have a slide deck for teaching people how to be in an audit. And one of the very things I say to them, silence is your best friend, because people, the human nature has a need to fill silence with conversation. And that's one of the downfalls with oddities. And then I also say, hey, if I kick you under the table, shut up. as a facilitator.
Yeah, Nelly, I very much agree with you on that point. So thank you for bringing that up. It's like, I know what you mean. Auditors do use that technique where they'll ask you a question and you answer it and they just go silent. And then there's some people out there who just start saying, oh, but we have this and we have that. And that's how they catch you. So I'm not saying an auditor is here to catch you. It's just a case of they just go silent. And if you've answered the question, fine. You know, if there's a little bit of a pause, that's okay. And by all means, you can follow that up and say, you know, do you require anything else? There's nothing wrong with asking that question if there's a bit of a silence. Do you require any of the documentation? And also be aware in the audit or the inspection, for that matter, there's going to be times where the inspector or the auditor is going to be needing a bit of quiet time where you've given them a record and they may need a few minutes, you know, to sort of get over it and have a look, etc. By all means, use that time to maybe start preparing for the next part of the audit, get some of your records together, get some examples together, and that's basically it. And another trick as well, I'm not trying to say auditors or inspectors are malicious in any way, but if they're saying something like, hey, you know, I need to go to the bathroom or I need to go to the kitchen, etc., accompany them. Because if they're walking around and they're on their own, they may spot something or they may talk to somebody and that particular person may say something or maybe misguide them. So that's something that you should always be aware of. So, you know, keep an eye on them as well. But again, it comes down to the thing, the auditors are not there to look for faults. They're just there to make sure that you're compliant. And if they find something wrong, they will write that up. They're not just there to 100% find something on you. So for example, like Luke was saying earlier, he had no non-conformities. I'm pretty sure the auditor wasn't just sitting there saying, hey, you know, it's the end of the day. I need to quickly find a non-conformity. I can't go back with a blank report. No, because the auditor is making notes and everything. And if they don't find any non-conformities with you, brilliant. And another thing here, a non-conformity isn't necessarily a bad thing. You know what I mean? It's kind of, it could just be something minor that needs fixing. It's just something that's not there. And this is a trick. And I really warn people, so please be wary of this. You have the regulations and you have the standards. But if you write something in your procedure to say that we are going to be doing X, Y, Z, and you do not do it, you get a non-conformity against your own procedure. So what I mean by that is if you start saying something like in your procedures, we're going to be doing management reviews every 3 months, but then you only be doing them every 4 months, that's a non-conformity. Whereas if you have in your procedures something like we will do them at minimum once a year, and you do them every 3 months or 4 months, that's acceptable. So what I say in your procedures is make sure that you have a little bit of breathing room either way. Don't overcommit. Just put down, you know, we may do them more often, etc. But don't start writing things in your procedures of which you don't necessarily think that you can follow, because then you get a non-conformity, not because you've not been compliant to the standards or regulations. It's just that you haven't been following your own processes. So that's the kind of one that we need to look to as well.
Interesting question for you, Karandeep, is one of the things when I implement a QMS, I always say we're going to do an annual with the option to do more, right? I mean, I'm working with a QE person who classics, he's used to the old method where you prescribe a monthly and you do a monthly one and all that rigor, and I'm like trying to talk him out of it. I'm like, look, you're a new startup. That's something like your big Boston Scientifics and your Abbott Laboratories would do. What would you tell that person? Because I really counsel just put one a year in there because that's acceptable for the standard.
So my response to be with that person is stop trying to impress the auditor and generate tons and tons of records of the audits just so it looks good on paper, but instead focus on what's going to benefit you as a company. Because if you're doing monthly audits, it's going to cost a lot of resources and times, and being a startup, resources are scarce. Get those resources and allocate them elsewhere. So Nelly, like you mentioned, once annual audit, it doesn't mean that you do it once a year. If this particular person sees a particular area of concern, they can do these audits as much as often, but doing audits for the sake of audits is not going to benefit the company, and it's just a waste of resources.
Thank you. I like that.
So education and training. So that's another one. So Nelly, like the question you just touched on to is educating people. Train your employees on the regulatory standards. Now, I'm not saying go to the company and start saying, you know, these are the FDA CFR 820, this is ISO 13485, read the standards and become a regulatory expert. But just let them know what this stuff means. It's shocking to some companies where I walk in their medical device manufacturers, and particularly the old school brick and mortar businesses, and say, hey, you know, what are the standards and regulations that you work to? And they're just looking at me blank. Now, I'm not asking them to remember it off by heart, but I would expect them to say something like, well, I don't know what standards we work to, but if you speak to the regulatory manager or something, and you've got that big ISO 13485 certificate in the coffee room, but then no one even knows what it means. So it's important that people understand that. Get the education piece in there, let people understand that.
You know, what's
And again,
interesting during internal audits, I actually will do mock, like for example, I just did an internal audit for a company and they've had the same auditor for like 5 years and they've just basically tell him everything. They like just opened the door, said, here's my dirty laundry, here's everything. And so I came in as an internal auditor and I noticed immediately and I asked the executive management, hey, I'm gonna come in hard and say, this is not how you're supposed to respond. And they go, yeah, do that. And I literally had one person very resistant, like, I have a relationship with this auditor. I said, I don't care if you have a relationship, you're exposing a liability for the company. So it's very interesting to talk about it during your, as an internal auditor, you can actually get an early warning sign that an auditee is a risk to the company. So at the end of an audit report, I always give them, here are your auditees that are at risk that could cause a problem in an external audit.
I'm not going to mention the name of the company, but I once had a client and they would make sure that certain people would take annual leave on the day of the audit, just because for that reason is then they may say something wrong or get the company in a bit of a pickle. Now, I'm a little bit against that, but then at the same time, it's kind of, yeah, I agree with you, Nelly. It's kind of, it's not that necessarily that person's doing anything wrong, but if they don't give information, that's really going to put you in a bit of a pickle.
Well, when I say at risk, I'm usually saying these people need additional coaching. They need additional mentoring because, you know, I never want to tell people to put them on vacation, but it's like this person literally, and still afterwards, they were getting ready for their inspection and the management rep came in and did auditor training and that person raises their hand and goes, well, I have a relationship. I'm going to do what I want. And the CEO went, I'm going to have a meeting with you after this training session. Because it was something new they didn't know. They were, you know, they're actually a label company being audited by an ISO auditor, and so they thought they were doing the right thing. And when I came in and said, no, you guys are creating more liability, it was interesting. I won't hijack. Apologize.
No, it's definitely a point. Again, it's audit's all about dealing with people. The documents are there, the records are there. It's all to do with people, and that's generally where it can particularly go wrong as well. Another one as well. Again, it's certification is a little bit of a pain point for mine. So I did my ISO 13485 lead auditor out of spite rather than requiring it. And it was just because I was sitting in multiple audits and I was constantly questioned, you know, for example, where is your lead auditor certificate? And then my argument was this is, would you rather have a guy who has a lead auditor certificate who's done no audits? Or would you prefer someone with no certification has done 100+ audits? I know which one I would pick, but it was something I did out of spite. So in my view here is if you are going to go down the auditor path, definitely go out and get these qualifications. You may not necessarily need them, but it's just something to keep the auditors a little bit quiet again, because the wording used is competent, not certified, not qualifications, just competent. And it's up to you to prove that one.
Yeah, so Karandeep, I've had the same experience. Like I've had an auditor. Now, mind you, I have been doing this since the first ISO was released. Pretty well, not the first one, but you know, the second one as things kept going. And I was responsible for building the audit program around all the changes. And I have built and run audits for, you know, going on 20 years now. And I had somebody tell me, oh, but you don't have a certificate to do it. And I'm like, no, I have 20 years of experience actually doing it, not taking a test. And then that also happened. Seems like that's happened twice in my career. I'm trying to think of the second one. But yeah, and so I would just recommend that there are several, you know, kind of inexpensive tests that you can go, you know, if you know what you're doing and just kind of pencil with it so you get something to shut them up.
But I also, because I in the early years as well, Michelle, I actually implemented a training course with internal, and I have a slide deck and training program that I can put people through, and then BQC will give you a cert that if you've done it internal audit training. Now, it's not the certificate that, you know, with the code, but what it is, it says, I've been through training that shows competency. And so, and I built that into pretty much every audit program. So when I was at Boston, God, 15 years ago, Abbott. I qualified a labeling person to be an auditor, and then he didn't get his ISO cert for 5 years, but he's now doing audits. That's all he does. But my point is, you don't have to go to an external program. You can do an internal one and give a training certificate saying this person satisfied our competency internally. And that counts. I don't know if that's helpful or not, but it
Yeah.
worked.
But maybe I'll get I have a guy on my team who probably has about 10 different types of certifications for all kinds of standards and all kinds of audits. Maybe I'll just get him to say he just trained the trainer type of situation. But
Exactly.
even though I was the one that hired him right out of college and taught him everything he knows. So I'm going to have him certify me that I knew what I was doing when I trained him.
They're just looking for evidence of training. That's what I've learned. And so when I first developed the program, and I've gone through numerous notified body and FDA, and they're like, oh, wow, I've never seen that. It's built into my procedure. It says, I can qualify an auditor internally, and here's how I do it. They go through training and on the job, and they accompany somebody for so many audits, and then they get tested, and then they're, so that's the program I put in there, and they're satisfied with that approach. I've qualified, not in the last 5 or 10 years in the small business industry, but when I was doing the larger ones, I qualified anywhere from 5 to 10 auditors internally. And it stood up during an audit.
That's great.
Perfect. So yeah, Nelly, Michelle, I agree with you on that one. I've seen examples of like that other companies where the trainer would just get some sort of certification to sign saying, I've trained this person on ISO, FDA, MDR, etc. That's become acceptable. So yeah, I agreed. You don't necessarily have to do the external ones. I just did them for peace of mind. If it's externally done and it's for the sake of a few days and the cost of a couple thousand, it was just get it out of the way, and then I could just peacefully continue. And especially when you're in the consultant space, Nelly and Michelle, I'm saying as well, sometimes when you're onboarding a client, they want to see certificates. So in some cases, you may lose a client just because you don't have the internal auditor or the external auditor. Or for example, a recent one that I did a year and a half ago was EU MDR practitioner. One of my clients was hell-bent on me having that particular qualification, even though I didn't necessarily need it. So I suppose from a business point of view, it may still be worthwhile having these certifications because it could help you secure that client.
Yeah, I have my certs too, and I've had them for a long time. But when you're starting out, it's hard to figure out, do I spend my money on a cert class or do I get internally? So I always start people internally so they're comfortable with it, and then recommend they go through the certificate program.
Yeah, definitely so. So another technique of which we can do is the post-internal audit follow-up. So obviously review your audit followings and observations, implement CAPAs. Now, this is one thing as well. Not everything requires a CAPA. If it's just a simple typo or something like that, just fix it. You don't need a CAPA. You don't need a full root cause analysis, etc. Don't open CAPAs for the sake of opening CAPAs. And I think one of the metrics that sort of boils my blood in a sense is when companies say, we are going to make sure that we reduce the amount of CAPAs to X amounts. Now, if you say you're going to reduce the amount of corrective actions to X amount, I accept. But preventive actions are great. The more preventive actions you have, the better, right? So again, that's one of the metrics as well. And I feel as though why companies open CAPAs is number one, is to impress auditors. And then number two, just do some sort of quality metric or quality objective or something, which is sort of not realistic. So that's what it comes down to.
Third reason that they open CAPAs because they don't know how to correct a nonconformance. So what I've done is in BQC land, in my NCR process, I created a 1-page NCR form that says I'm doing a process NCR, and all it is to, I've noticed an issue, I've corrected it, there's no root cause, it's a one-time event, and then I sign off on it. So it's kind of like, and it can be a small CAPA because you could do root cause. But what I found more often is they come to me and they say, I need to issue a CAPA because I found a nonconformance I want to correct, and I want a record showing I corrected it. So I did that in the NCR process.
Yeah, I mean, something like that's acceptable as well. So it's just, again, a nonconformity doesn't, as you said, just have some sort of record there. And again, Nelly, what it comes down to is record that. Don't just say, oh, we fixed it because we did X, Y, Z. Have some sort of record there that you've done it. Because again, it goes back to the quality philosophy, is if it's not recorded, it didn't happen. By all means, you can say, yes, we did the audit. Okay, great. Where's the report? So again, it's all to do with recording documentation. That is the key here. So education and training, we've already sort of covered, so we can skip past that one. I don't think that's really it. So yeah, thank you guys for listening. I was going to keep this as an open talk. So again, I'm going to put the question here right now to the audience is, what is your biggest fear when it comes to external audits or inspections? What are your concerns? Is it an area you maybe don't understand? Where do you guys stand on that question?
I have something.
Please.
In my humble opinion, a quality management system is only you write down what you do and then you do what you have written down. And it's essentially as simple as that. But with a very beautiful quality management system, you can still make shitty products. And yeah, usually when sometimes it just looks good on paper, but in reality it can be hard. I mean, if you put your tolerances just this wide, then everything is okay. It falls within your tolerances. But I had a coffee table discussion with an auditor once, and he had a good tip. He said, like you do incoming inspection of some goods, and you measure if it's good enough. And then formerly we had just two bins. You had the good bin and the bad bin. And that's good enough for your quality management system. But he said, if you start doing a measurement, why don't you note down what you just have measured? Because then over time you can see if there is a drift in your measurements towards the bad or towards the good. And you can do preventive actions on the basis of your measurements of incoming goods alone. And I think that was a very good tip that would make a quality management system increase the quality.
Yeah, I agree with you on that one, Luke. It's very easy to just tick the boxes and impress an auditor. And again, even when you go and audit, if you are compliant and you tick every box, great, you get your certification, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's an optimal quality management system. It doesn't necessarily mean it's actually making a great impact on this. So again, I think that's maybe another point that we can allude to here is don't just chase the certification or just say, hey, look, we're compliant or we're following regulations. Make something that actually benefits you as a company. You know, your quality management system should accelerate your company. It should benefit you. It should be a return on investment. Is if you put this much in, this is how much you get out. That's the way that it should be. So don't just try to be compliant, but actually go out there and try to make an impact and actually focus on quality.
Yes, I
I'm
agree.
very intrigued, Hyben, by your pixelated girl with earring. You're on mute. You're on mute,
On
Luke.
mute.
Luke, you're on mute.
Mute. Okay, I'm sorry. I unmute. Yeah, it's from my old hometown, Delft. Johannes Vermeer came from Delft. It's one of my favorite paintings. Actually, the site on Delft is my favorite one because it's Delft. But this is the girl with the pale earring. It's a good movie also with
Scarlet, right?
yeah, Johansson. Yeah.
But why pixelated?
I don't know. Maybe there's royalties on the
Funny.
actual picture. I
Rick,
don't
you
know.
had a question in the chat.
Yeah, I thought it was so interesting the way you put this reply to the auditor asking an employee a question where he doesn't or she doesn't feel really like it's their area of expertise. And so in the middle of writing that down, you said something else interesting, which distracted me. And by the time I finally got down to it, so what I had was, it's all right for someone to say, that is outside my area of, and I can't remember, responsibility, competence. Let me refer you to an employee whose area of responsibility this is. So that's what I wrote down. But what did you actually say? I loved it. I forgot it.
So the wording that I would say is that the question that you've asked me is something that's outside of my scope of work. But then if this is an area of work you want to know more about, go and speak to this particular person. And that, but again, it's also important that that person knows who to go to. You can't just say, hey, look, that's not my department and I don't know what to do. It's more important for the auditors that you show who is doing what in the company and you guys speak to each other and you know who to speak to.
Yeah, I didn't want to write down responsibility because that ticks off some quality people and probably auditors. And hey, everybody's responsible for quality, and and the whole 9 yards. And sometimes it's important how you answer a question.
I actually take a different approach, Rick. What I tell my auditees is that if you don't know the answer, even if you know who it is, I say my response, I recommend to say, I don't have the answer right now. Can I follow up with you? And then if there's a different person who's responsible, I bring them into the room and say, I looked into it and I'm not responsible for it. This person is, do you want to ask them questions?
Are
And
you
so then
afraid
that
of-
may
Are you afraid of saying that's outside of my role? That would be
No.
equivalent to the auditor?
I have absolutely no problem about it. What I have found is the simplest answer that you teach your auditees is the one they're going to remember.
And use all the
so-
time, no matter what.
Yeah, exactly. And so it does, and the other problem is I've had some terrible audit experiences where the person says, I don't know, and then this person's responsible, and now they start throwing people under a bus and don't realize they're doing it. And so I've just it's not a wrong answer. Like I said, I keep it simple, Stanley. And so my auditees can remember it, but it's also to prevent people from getting diarrhea of the mouth.
Charming.
Mm.
Remind us your military background, right?
Yeah, Coast Guard.
Yeah, okay. Ms. Friedman, you're looking lovely today. Have you ever been audited?
No, I have not, but I have a great regulatory person, so I'm not concerned.
Good answer. Alexandros, you took yourself off camera, but in your comments, it seems as though this topic really resonates with you. Have you been audited?
Yes. Hello to everybody. I have to go now to Basel. I have one appointment, but I will answer you very quickly. Yes, we have various audits in external. I made internal. What I can say is, yes, it's important that that both sides they feel comfortable, that you don't play one power game, because otherwise it must be kept the natural communication, in my opinion, not having too much dominance as audit when you are in the company. What I wanted also to mention is the certification. There is a hot discussion about this. A lot of institutes offer certifications in our days, and there are more and more. And this generates, of course, to many people the scare. Oh, if I am not certified, what will happen? Yeah. But we, as experience, we see that it goes also without certification. Yeah, because we cannot say that the certification is something negative, or it brings disadvantages. It is one, let's say, extra, let's say, advantage in your CV documents. But it can work also otherwise, because at least the audit is not just specific knowledge, it is also natural communication, human communication. And what I wanted to share with you is, for example, I was by BSI in the past, and we made some trainings, and what I never have
I'm sorry, you're
understood,
with
and
BSI
maybe
and you made some what? With BSI, you made some...
I was by BSI, and I started there some trainings, for example, and it has been offered to me if I want to get the lead auditor to follow the full course to run with other auditors. I was in York, yes, and in York we made some trainings, and what I remember was, for example, one lead auditor must reach his aim with very less questions, and I have never really understood what is behind of this. Why somebody has to make less questions to reach, let's say, the end aim. I can do many small questions and find, let's say, where exactly it's hanging, the QMS, yeah, or in general in the company, the organization is something which is lack of training, or
what was their
so
logic
I
for
never
having
have
fewer
understood
questions?
really
Oh,
this.
You
That is what I
never
wanted
got
to
the
share with
answer.
you.
Karandeep,
Please?
do you have a thought on that?
Yes.
Sorry?
Dear Karandeep, maybe you can have you heard about this, that
Sure.
one, let's say, experienced auditor must do very less questions and understand exactly what happens not correct in this company, yeah?
Yes and no. I mean, an experienced auditor usually walks into a company as maybe has a list of things that they would typically see in most companies, and has particular areas that they probably know that they need to dig into. But I don't quite agree with that statement, because when you go and audit a company, you should always go in with a fresh mind and just be ready to expect the unexpected. It's quite easy to go into auditor mode and just assume that all companies operate in and around the same way. So yes, I agree to a certain extent is An experienced auditor usually walks into the room and probably knows where the problem areas are going to be. But then at the other end of the scale, they should always treat it as a completely fresh audit and just not going with assumptions, because the moment you go with assumptions
Yes,
about a company, you moment
exactly.
start missing areas.
Yes, and thank you very much for this. And my final phrase, thank you very much, Joey, for giving me the possibility to tell something about this. My last phrase is that in BSI, for example, they understand the certification that you run with a lot of in a lot of audits together, listening to these audits. Yeah, let's say 6 months long, and then you do the exam, which is relatively strict, yeah, and then you do some hours again. You lead again one audit with the guy which is applying the exam to you, yeah. And then if you pass, then you are lead certified auditor. That is what the certification institutes understands practically. But as I mentioned before, I am also in this opinion that the experience counts, the normal human communication, and of course, you are there to bring one added value to the company, not to play the police. Thank you very much. And I will watch you now by ears because I will have to run to my train. Thank you very much.
Before you go.
And if we don't talk, very nice Christmas to everyone, yeah?
And you, but before you go, quickly, how many languages do you speak?
English, German, and Greek.
What I find amazing is that your knowledge is so impressive that you can conduct business in another language. It's one thing for me to say, yeah, I speak Spanish, but I wouldn't be able to be an effective marketing strategist in Spanish. You can be an effective regulatory person in a foreign tongue, which is very impressive. That's number one. Number two is, how global are we? One of our guests just says, well, I actually have to go to Basel right now. So that's impressive. And then third was Karandeep's answer.
We are global, dear Joy. We are global.
Yes, I know.
Basel is also one. Yes.
I was just going to say, Karandeep's answer sounded like the beginning of a joke. An auditor walks into a company. So that sounds like the setup for a funny joke.
Yes. I wanted also to ask, I am from my nature very open person. How can I say? I must say really honest things. The situation in the medtech at the moment in Europe is really difficult. We see unemployment. I must say we know the reasons. Yeah. I wanted also to ask Karandeep how it is the situation in UK, because as UK-based person, you have a little difficulties to work in Europe. I have some colleagues which are UK-based. So let's say we have one art of crisis at the moment in medtech, because not of course of interest of economy reasons, but because of the over-regulation, and that the startups and the middle-sized companies cannot go through these first steps to bring, let's say, in this level the product that maybe one big giant can buy this product. All these topics that also Michelle analyzed very well in her webinars. We know the situation, but I must say it's really hard. Let's hope that the situation will change. Yeah.
I agree with you, Alexandros. I'm in the UK. Yeah. Love to chat with you, but I know you have a train to catch. So it is a difficult situation over here. But
yes, I prefer to be honest. Why? That's why I don't like to post in LinkedIn to follow. I have bad mood. I say that honest. Not a bad mood in mention aggressive or something, but I am disappointed because we wanted to correct this world, this meta world, and we make everything so complicated. And I try always to bring ideas. I think one idea which will help the European economic market, let's say, let's forget Europe. I believe that it is one for free service, like FDA is doing, one for free service, not from notified bodies, from one over authority over the notified bodies, which can answer the first questions for one startup in our days. I was in Basel in Novartis last week in Pavilion. There are some talks there, and I met some Swiss politicians. And I told them, I took the microphone and I say, we have innovation. The problem is how we can support this innovation by making their life easier. Because sharks, excuse me for the expression, all the companies are going to startups, let's come here. Of course, it is business. I fully respect that, yeah. But in the eyes of the startups, we are sharks, yeah. We are sharks. We want to charge every question, everything. Let's help this innovation in the medical devices by bringing this for free service, like in the USA. That is what I can share with you.
Alexander, I used to be an investment banker. The stock markets across Europe, it's the same problem. The airlines across Europe. It's as if in Europe, if it was the US, was Europe, every state would have its own airline, would have its own stock market, would have its own regulatory framework. They all still feel that they want to have their independence about things, but they still want to. It layers and layers complexities in all of these things.
We are many opinions under one small geographic area. I really US has that really easier, yeah, and different mentalities. You know, for example, one practical example: BSI wanted with British from UK with English-speaking auditors. Audit in Germany. That could never work, yeah. So imagine that is also one cultural issue. So in the Germany, you must talk German if you audit someone, because otherwise they will not hear you.
Alexandros, as your friend, may I remind you, you have a train to catch.
Excuse me.
I don't want you to miss your train because I know you get passionate about this.
It is one cultural event in Basel for one Greek archaeological event. I will take the next. It's okay. For me, it's also important, this talk that we do now. I will take the next. It's okay. Or otherwise, I will hear you with the earphones and.
Yeah, put your earphones in.
The UK, again, with Brexit, did about the stupidest thing possible, because then they because of Brexit, the UK has had to create this UKCA mark that no one's using, and yet they've had to establish a governmental agency because they can't say, oh, no, we're not going to do it anymore. But they're also accepting CE mark and accepting FDA as if they're Argentina.
Karandeep, has that resulted in extra work for you? Have you had extra billable hours because of Brexit?
Not necessarily. It's just a lot of companies are saying, you know what, sod the UK, we're just going to go to Europe. It's too much hassle.
Sod the UK.
That's pretty much how it's been.
And like I say, the UK is actually, when it comes to regulating medical devices, is actually like pretend the UKCA thing doesn't actually exist. If you've got CE, if you've got FDA, you can come into the UK.
It reminds me of Canada, how they have, it's like MD-SAP, you have to do it, but their volume is like 10% of the US. So is it worth it?
I don't know if there are any Canadians on the call. Canada can't even afford its own country dialing code. Are they really a country?
Canadians, that would be nice, yeah.
Sean, is Yujan confirmed for next week? Do you know?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay, so he's going to talk about machine learning and AI for FDA clearances. So that will be interesting, I think, for most of the folks who found Karandeep as fascinating as we have.
Thank you. One funny thing that I heard from an MD-SAP auditor was people trying to make friends with the auditor to try to get them on their side so that they can help convince the management that they need to change the way that they do things. And this was like in the category of never, ever do this. Never, ever think that the auditor is your friend and your ally against the management to get you what you want. you know, to improve the quality management system or to, you know, get more resources. I don't know. Comments?
Sounds reasonable to me. I don't have an opinion on that, but thing is, as you know, Sean is very much co-leading, if not leading, 10X prep and figuring out who the speakers are and the like. I am just thinking now, in light of this conversation about Brexit and the like, perhaps a relevant topic for us this year will be the medtech landscape under a new administration. I think
I posted a thread on Slack on that very topic.
today.
No, I think it was last week,
Okay.
week before maybe even.
We did a webinar on that yesterday with Ed Doherty.
Yeah. How did that go?
Yeah, it went really well, and he had
Maybe some of those
thoughts.
folks would like to reprise in person.
Yeah, yes, that'd be good. Okay.
What was the outcome? I'd be interested to hear.
If you allow me, excuse me. Sometimes it is the human competition. If you can imagine, here in Switzerland, we have competition between Basel and Zurich. That means how we should understand practically the competition, that the one city like to be more, let's say, viral in medtech or in pharma like the other one, and it is like separate country. So if you can imagine now how this recomplicates our medtech world. I'm finished.
If you come next week, which will be our last for 2024, wear red or green. And you can get away with the tie, Andre, if that's all you can muster. Have you spoken with Mrs. Domino yet about May?
No, I forgot, Joe.
Is she there?
No.
How convenient. He'll do anything to get out of this. You know what? If we do 10X 2026, what do you guys think about moving it to New Jersey? Maybe your house. How many people can you accommodate in your house, Andre?
As many as you want, Joe, but we gotta.
No, seriously, you have how many acres there in New Jersey do you have?
Not that many.
No.
But we do have to deal with the drones right now.
What is that?
Right.
186 sightings.
What's going on there?
We don't know. It's we had 3 over my house in my area last night.
Maybe they were still looking for this guy they found in Pennsylvania.
They found the guy in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
You
Talk
guys
about
think that?
dedication.
Yeah, but would New Jersey acknowledge that?
I don't know if you know, but I think it's in Seattle, or maybe it's in New York, that people are posting basically wanted signs on other CEOs.
Yes, yes.
Like
in New York
one
City.
down, how many to go,
Yeah, New York City, they got
That
those
is
up.
and wanted posters.
Despicable. That is despicable. I am disgusted by that.
100%.
Yeah, me too.
I am just, when I see the news, I get livid and the sailor comes out. So
That's right.
I canceled my all of my news subscriptions on November 6th. I can't.
Yeah.
All right. Sorry. Merry Christmas, everyone.
Merry Christmas.
I'll
Buon
see you
Natale.
next week in red or green.
Red
Bless
or
you. Thank you,
green?
Release
Karandeep.
Navidad.
is
How
that
about a
next?
Christmas tie?
Yeah,
Take care.
that's next
Bye.
week. It will be our last. Thank you,
Aw.
Alexandros. It'll be our last in 2024. We're going to take off for Christmas and New Year's as we do.
And
But
enjoy the
you and I can
Christmas.
get on the phone
See
anytime
you
you
soon.
want. All
See
right.
you soon
Hey,
again.
Alexandros, if you can make it across the pond for May 6th, we'd love to meet you in person.
Here, I'll wear this next time.
There you go.
Don't spoil it.
My Christmas crown.
I love
Among
it,
the
Nelly.
children.
Hey, and Joe,
go
don't forget
productive,
New
everyone.
Jersey. Okay.
See you next week.
All right, bye.
Hey guys.
Bye.
Bye.